The scream that shattered Sarah's life came at 6:30 a.m. By 7:15 a.m., her car was being towed. By 9:30 a.m., her 6-month-old baby was gone. And by noon, Karen Whitmore was in federal custody, facing kidnapping charges that would destroy her forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The scream shattered the peaceful Tuesday morning in Willowbrook Heights. Sarah Martinez jerked awake from the couch where she had fallen asleep while feeding her 6-month-old daughter Emma. The baby's bottle had spilled milk all over Sarah's work uniform. Through her front window, Sarah saw Karen Whitmore standing in her driveway, pointing furiously at Emma's small pink tricycle that sat harmlessly on the lawn. The HOA president's face was red with rage, her perfectly styled blonde hair whipping in the wind as she gestured wildly. 3 warnings, Mrs. Martinez. 3. Karen's voice carried across the entire neighborhood. That eyesore has been polluting our community standards for weeks. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up Emma, who had started crying from the shouting. Her husband David had been deployed overseas for 3 months, and every day felt like a battle she was losing. Between her part-time job at the local clinic and caring for Emma alone, she could barely keep up with basic survival, let alone Karen's endless list of neighborhood rules. But this morning was different. This morning Karen had crossed a line. Sarah opened her front door, Emma crying in her arms. "Karen, it's 6:30 in the morning. You're scaring my baby." "Your baby?" Karen laughed coldly. "Your baby is the least of your problems. You owe this community $480 in unpaid HOA fees, your grass is 2 inches too long, and now you're turning our respectable neighborhood into a daycare center." "She's 6 months old," Sarah said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and anger. "She can't even sit up by herself, let alone ride that tricycle." "I don't care if she's 6 days old," Karen snapped. "Rules are rules. And speaking of rules, you have exactly 24 hours to pay every penny you owe, or I'm taking action." Sarah felt something snap inside her chest. 3 months of harassment, 3 months of threats, 3 months of being treated like a criminal because she couldn't afford Karen's ridiculous fees while her husband risked his life overseas. "What kind of action?" Sarah demanded, stepping onto her porch. Karen's smile was pure evil. "The kind that will teach you and everyone else in this neighborhood what happens when you disrespect my authority." That's when Sarah saw the towing truck parked at the end of her street. Her stomach dropped. "You called a tow truck? For a child's toy?" "I called it for your car," Karen said sweetly. "Turns out unpaid HOA fees give me the right to have vehicles removed from community property. Your driveway counts." Sarah's world started spinning. Without her car she couldn't get to work. Without work she couldn't pay rent, couldn't buy food for Emma, couldn't survive. "Karen, please," Sarah begged, Emma's cries growing louder. "I'll get the money. David's military pay is just delayed because of some paperwork with his deployment. I just need a few more days." "Too late," Karen replied, signaling to the tow truck driver. "You should have thought about that before you decided to turn my neighborhood into a slum." As the tow truck driver approached Sarah's car with chains, neighbors began emerging from their houses. Mrs. Chin, the elderly Chinese woman next door, hurried over with her walker. "Karen Whitmore," Mrs. Chin called out. "What you doing to this poor girl?" "Enforcing community standards," Karen replied coldly. "Something everyone else seems to have forgotten how to do." Sarah watched helplessly as her car was loaded onto the truck. Emma was screaming now, sensing her mother's panic. The sound of her daughter's distress mixed with the mechanical whining of the truck created a nightmare Sarah couldn't wake up from. "This isn't over," Sarah said quietly, but her voice carried a new strength that surprised even her. Karen leaned in close, her breath smelling like coffee and cruelty. "Oh honey, you have no idea how right you are. This is just the beginning." "Mrs. Martinez." The voice was sharp, demanding. "I know you're in there." Sarah opened the door to find Karen Whitmore standing on her doorstep, clipboard in hand, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving despite the morning breeze. As the HOA president, Karen had made it her personal mission to make Sarah's life miserable ever since David left. "Your grass is 2 inches too long," Karen announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "And there's still that children's toy in your front yard. I've told you before, this is a respectable neighborhood." Sarah glanced at Emma's small pink tricycle sitting harmlessly on the lawn. "Karen, she's 6 months old. She can't even ride it yet. My neighbor Mrs. Chin gave it to us for when she's older." "Rules are rules," Karen snapped. "Speaking of which, your HOA fees are 60 days overdue. That's $480 you owe this community." Sarah's stomach dropped. She had been trying to scrape together that money for weeks. I know, I'm working on it. David's military pay is delayed because of some paperwork issues with his deployment and… I don't want to hear excuses, Karen interrupted. You have until Friday or we'll be forced to take action. What kind of action? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Karen's smile was cold. The kind that reminds people what happens when they don't respect community standards. After Karen left, Sarah sank into her couch, Emma crawling into her lap. The baby's innocent smile broke her heart. How could she explain to this little angel that mommy couldn't even afford to keep their home safe from the neighborhood bully? After the tow truck disappeared with her car, Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights trying to figure out how to survive. She called in sick to work. She had no way to get there anyway. She rationed Emma's baby food, knowing she couldn't afford more until David's delayed military pay finally came through. On Thursday evening, Sarah's phone rang. It was David calling from overseas, his voice crackling through the poor connection. Sarah? Baby, I heard what happened. My commanding officer said our pay should be released by Monday. Can you hold on until then? Sarah looked at Emma sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware that their world was falling apart. I'll try, David. I love you. I love you too. And Sarah? Don't let that witch break you. You're stronger than she is. But Friday morning brought a new nightmare. Sarah was giving Emma her morning bottle when she heard cars pulling up outside. Through the window she saw Karen's silver SUV, followed by another towing truck and what looked like a security van. Sarah's hands started shaking so badly she almost dropped Emma's bottle. She quickly called her neighbor, Mrs. Chin, an elderly Chinese woman who had become like a grandmother to Emma since David deployed. Mrs. Chin, something's happening. Karen's back with more trucks. Can you come over? I'll be right there, dear. Don't let them in. But before Mrs. Chin could arrive, Karen was pounding on the door again, this time with 2 large men in security uniforms. Sarah could hear her shouting through the door. Mrs. Martinez. I know you're hiding in there. Time's up. Sarah held Emma close, the baby's innocent eyes looking up at her with complete trust. How could she protect her daughter when she felt so powerless herself? The pounding grew louder. Open this door or we'll open it ourselves. With trembling hands, Sarah unlocked the door, knowing she had no choice. Mrs. Martinez, by the power vested in me by the Willowbrook Heights HOA, I'm here to collect payment or begin asset seizure. Asset seizure? Sarah's voice cracked. Karen, I have most of the money. I just need a few more days. You've had 60 days, Karen said coldly. Step aside. The security guards pushed past Sarah into her home. Emma, sensing the tension, began to cry. You can't just come into my house. Sarah protested. Actually, we can, Karen replied, pulling out a legal document. Failure to pay HOA fees gives us the right to seize property equal to the debt value. Sarah watched in horror as the men began looking around her living room. One of them pointed at Emma's baby swing, her play mat, even her high chair. No, Sarah said firmly. Those are my daughter's things. She needs them. Should have thought of that before you decided not to pay your dues, Karen replied. That's when Sarah made her fatal mistake. She had to use the bathroom desperately, all the stress was affecting her body. Please just, give me 1 minute. Watch Emma, she's perfectly safe in her swing. It was the longest minute of Sarah's life. When she came back, her blood ran cold. The living room was empty. Emma's swing was gone. Emma was gone. Where is my baby? Sarah screamed, running outside. Mrs. Martinez, by the power vested in me by the Willowbrook Heights HOA, I'm here to collect payment or begin asset seizure. Karen stood in Sarah's doorway like a conquering general, her 2 security guards flanking her sides. In her manicured hands was a thick folder of official-looking documents. Asset seizure? Sarah's voice cracked as she held Emma protectively. Karen, I told you David's pay is coming Monday. I have most of the money. I just need a few more days. You've had 60 days, Karen said coldly, pushing past Sarah into her home. And now you owe additional fees. Late charges, collection costs, legal processing fees. Your debt is now $680. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. $680? You said it was $480. That was before you forced me to take legal action, Karen replied with a cruel smile. Step aside. The security guards pushed into Sarah's living room like they owned the place. Emma, sensing the tension and the presence of strangers, began to cry. Her little face scrunched up as tears rolled down her cheeks. You can't just come into my house. Sarah protested, her voice rising above Emma's cries. Actually, we can, Karen replied, pulling out a legal document with official seals and signatures. Failure to pay HOA fees gives us the right to seize property equal to the debt value. It's all perfectly legal. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might explode. She watched in horror as the men began examining everything in her living room with the cold efficiency of repo men. One of them pointed at Emma's baby swing, her colorful play mat, even her high chair. No, Sarah said firmly, stepping between the guards and Emma's things. Those are my daughter's belongings. She needs them. They're not luxury items, they're necessities for a baby. Should have thought of that before you decided not to pay your dues, Karen replied, making notes on her clipboard. A debt is a debt, Mrs. Martinez. Your poor planning doesn't constitute an emergency on our part. Mrs. Chen's voice called from outside. Sarah? What's happening? Don't let her in, Karen instructed the guards. This is private HOA business. Sarah felt trapped, surrounded by people who seemed to think her home was their property to pillage. Emma's cries were getting louder, more desperate, as if she could sense her mother's fear. Karen, please, Sarah begged, tears starting to form in her eyes. Look at her. She's just a baby. She doesn't understand what's happening. Can't we work something out? Some kind of payment plan. The time for negotiations is over, Karen replied coldly. You've shown nothing but disrespect for this community and its rules. Actions have consequences. That's when Sarah made her fatal mistake. The stress and fear were affecting her body, and she desperately needed to use the bathroom. She looked at Emma, crying in her swing, then at the hostile faces surrounding her. Please, Sarah said quietly, just give me 1 minute. She's perfectly safe in her swing. I'll be right back. Karen's eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like hunger. Of course, dear. Take your time. It was the longest minute of Sarah's life. In the bathroom, she could hear Emma's cries continuing, mixed with the sound of the men moving around her living room. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to think of something, anything that could save her family from this nightmare. When she came back, her blood ran cold. The living room was empty. Emma's swing was gone. Emma was gone. Where is my baby? Sarah screamed, running outside in a panic that consumed her entire being. Karen was standing by her silver SUV, Emma crying desperately in her arms. The baby's face was red and tear-streaked, her little hands reaching toward the house where her mother had disappeared. Don't worry, Karen said with sickening calmness, she's just collateral until you pay what you owe. Think of it as motivated payment assistance. Give me my daughter. Sarah lunged forward with the fury of a mother protecting her child, but the security guard stepped in her path, blocking her like human walls. You want her back? Karen asked, shifting Emma in her arms as the baby's cries grew more heartbroken. Pay the $680. Cash only. No checks, no promises, no payment plans. Sarah felt the world tilting around her. This couldn't be happening. Not in America. Not in a civilized neighborhood. Not to her baby. Karen, please? Sarah fell to her knees on her own front lawn, tears streaming down her face. She's hungry. She needs to eat. She's never been away from me for more than an hour. Then perhaps you should have prioritized your financial obligations, Karen replied, as if discussing a late library book instead of a kidnapped child. Mrs. Chen appeared at the scene, moving as fast as her elderly legs could carry her. Her face was pale with shock and outrage. Karen Whitmore, what do you think you're doing? Give that child back immediately. Stay out of this, old woman, Karen snapped. This is official HOA business. This woman owes this community money, and I'm ensuring collection. Taking a baby is not collection. Mrs. Chin shouted, her voice stronger than Sarah had ever heard it. This is kidnapping. This is crime. Emma's cries turned into heartbroken wails that seemed to pierce the soul of everyone present. The sound was primal, desperate, a baby calling for her mother in the only way she knew how. Even the security guards looked uncomfortable, shifting on their feet and avoiding eye contact. She's hungry, Sarah pleaded, crawling toward Karen on her hands and knees. Please, she needs her bottle. She needs to be changed. She doesn't understand why mommy isn't holding her. Then pay up, Karen replied, getting into her SUV while still holding the screaming baby. You know where to find me. Karen, wait. Sarah screamed, but the SUV was already pulling away. Sarah collapsed completely onto her front lawn, her body racked with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Mrs. Chin knelt beside her, her own eyes filled with tears. We call police now, Mrs. Chin said firmly, her accented English thick with emotion. We call police right now. Will they help? Sarah asked desperately, looking up at her neighbor through blurred vision. She said it was legal. She had papers. Taking baby from mother is never legal, Mrs. Chin replied with absolute certainty. Never, nowhere, not ever. Mrs. Chin helped Sarah to her feet, both women shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Sarah's legs felt like water, but her mind was crystal clear about one thing. She would get her baby back no matter what it took. We call police now, Mrs. Chin repeated, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. Sarah called 911 with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The dispatcher's voice seemed to come from another world. 911, what's your emergency? Someone took my baby, Sarah said, her voice breaking on every word. The HOA president took my 6-month-old daughter because I owe fees. She drove away with her. Ma'am, did you say someone took your baby over HOA fees? Yes. She said it was legal, but it can't be legal. Please, you have to help me find her. Within minutes, 2 police cars were pulling up to Sarah's house, their red and blue lights flashing like beacons of hope. Officer Rodriguez, a young Hispanic man with kind eyes, and Officer Thompson, an older woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, listened to Sarah's story with growing disbelief and anger. Ma'am, let me make sure I understand this correctly, Officer Thompson said, taking notes. Your HOA president took your baby because of unpaid fees, claiming it was some kind of legal seizure? Yes. She had papers, official-looking documents. She said Emma was collateral until I paid $680. Officer Rodriguez was already on his radio, his voice urgent. Dispatch, we need an immediate bolo for a silver SUV, license plate? He looked at Sarah. I don't know her license plate, Sarah said, panic rising again. I was so focused on Emma, I didn't think to look. We'll find it, Officer Thompson assured her. Ma'am, I want you to understand something very clearly. No HOA anywhere in this country has the authority to take someone's child. What this woman did is kidnapping, pure and simple. She's being charged with kidnapping? Sarah asked, hope flickering in her chest. If we're lucky, kidnapping will be the least of her charges, Officer Rodriguez said grimly. This is federal territory now. Taking a child across jurisdictional lines, especially with demands for money, that's FBI-level serious. The next hour felt like the longest of Sarah's life. Police units across 3 counties were searching for Karen's SUV. Sarah rode with Officer Thompson, scanning every street, every parking lot, every shopping center, praying with every breath that they would find Emma safe. Mrs. Chin had called other neighbors and word was spreading quickly through Willowbrook Heights. People who had been too afraid to stand up to Karen before were now coming forward with information. The Johnsons remembered Karen mentioning she liked to shop at Westfield Mall when she was stressed. The Patel family had seen her SUV heading in that direction. All units, we have a possible location, came the voice over the radio. Westfield Shopping Mall, North Parking Lot. Silver SUV matching the description. Sarah's heart felt like it would burst from her chest. Is she there? Is Emma there? We're about to find out, Officer Thompson replied, pressing harder on the accelerator. The mall parking lot came into view, and there it was, Karen's silver SUV, parked casually between a minivan and a pickup truck as if nothing unusual had happened. Sarah was out of the police car before it had fully stopped, running toward the SUV with Officer Thompson calling for her to wait. Through the back window, Sarah could see Emma's car seat. But it was empty. She took her inside, Officer Rodriguez said grimly, speaking into his radio. Suspect has entered the mall with the child. We need all exits covered immediately. The mall was enormous, 3 levels, dozens of stores, thousands of people going about their normal Friday shopping. Sarah felt overwhelming panic rising in her chest. Emma had never been in such a crowded, noisy place. She would be terrified. We'll find her, Officer Thompson promised, but Sarah could hear the concern in her voice too. They split up, officers checking store by store while Sarah ran through the corridors calling Emma's name, even though she knew a 6-month-old couldn't respond. Shoppers stared as she passed, some pulling out phones to record the drama, others looking concerned. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Then Officer Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. Found them. 2nd floor children's clothing store. Suspect appears to be shopping. Sarah ran up the escalator 2 steps at a time, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. She could hear Emma crying even before she reached the store entrance. There, in the middle of Baby Gap, was Karen Whitmore. She was holding Emma with one arm while examining tiny dresses with the other, completely ignoring the baby's desperate cries. Emma's face was red and blotchy from crying, her little body rigid with distress. "Emma?" Sarah cried out, her voice carrying across the entire store. The baby turned toward her mother's voice and immediately reached out her little arms, her cries becoming even more desperate as she recognized the person she needed most in the world. "Ma'am, you need to hand over the child immediately," Officer Thompson commanded, her hand moving to her handcuffs. Karen looked genuinely surprised, as if she couldn't understand why everyone was making such a fuss. "What's the problem?" "I'm just babysitting until the debt is paid. Look, I'm even buying her some new clothes." She held up a pink dress. "This community takes care of its own." "You kidnapped this woman's baby," Officer Rodriguez said firmly, approaching with handcuffs ready. "Step away from the child." "That's ridiculous," Karen protested, but her confidence was finally starting to crack. "This is a civil HOA matter. I have documentation proving my legal right to collect assets." Sarah didn't wait for permission. She lunged forward and snatched Emma from Karen's arms, holding her daughter so tight she thought she might never let go. Emma's cries immediately turned to relieved whimpers as she snuggled against her mother's chest, her tiny fists gripping Sarah's shirt. "It's okay, baby," Sarah whispered through her tears. "Mommy's here. Mommy's got you. I'll never let anyone take you again." "Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for kidnapping," Officer Thompson announced. For the first time, Karen's confidence cracked. "Wait, you can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. I was following proper procedures." "Ma'am, there is no procedure that allows you to take someone's child," Officer Rodriguez explained as he handcuffed her. "You have the right to remain silent." As Karen was led away in handcuffs, shoppers in the mall stopped to stare. Some pulled out their phones to record the scene. Sarah didn't care about the attention. She was just grateful to have Emma back in her arms. But the story was far from over. Back at the police station, Sarah learned that Karen's legal documentation was completely fabricated. No HOA anywhere in the country had the authority to take someone's child, regardless of unpaid fees. "She's being charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and fraud," Detective Martinez explained to Sarah. "The FBI is also getting involved because she crossed state lines when she took your daughter to that mall." "FBI?" Sarah asked, surprised. "Kidnapping becomes a federal crime when state lines are crossed, even if it's just a few miles," the detective explained. "This woman is in serious trouble." Over the next few days, the story exploded on social media. Someone at the mall had recorded Karen being arrested while holding a crying baby, and the video went viral with the hashtag #HOAKaren. News stations picked up the story, and suddenly Sarah was getting calls from reporters across the country. But the real shock came when Detective Martinez called her with an update. "Mrs. Martinez, we've been investigating Mrs. Whitmore's background, and we found something disturbing. This isn't the first time she's done something like this." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean?" 2 years ago, in her previous neighborhood in Arizona, she had an elderly man's medical equipment confiscated for unpaid HOA fees. He ended up in the hospital. "That's horrible," Sarah whispered. "It gets worse. We found evidence that she's been embezzling HOA funds for years. The money you and other residents paid? She's been using it for personal expenses. Your community has been basically funding her shopping addiction." Sarah thought about Karen's designer clothes, her expensive car, her perfectly manicured nails. It all made sense now. Word spread through Willowbrook Heights like wildfire. By Sunday morning, there was an enormous crowd gathered in the community center. Sarah arrived with Emma in her stroller, nervous about facing her neighbors after everything that had happened. She needn't have worried. "Sarah." Mrs. Chin called out, rushing over with a casserole dish and tears in her eyes. "How is little Emma? How are you holding up?" "We're okay," Sarah replied, though her voice still shook when she thought about those terrible hours. "The police say Emma wasn't hurt, just scared." One by one her neighbors approached. The Johnsons from down the street apologized profusely for not standing up to Karen sooner. "We were cowards," Mr. Johnson admitted. "We knew she was going too far, but we were afraid she'd target our family next." The Williams family offered to help with yard work while David was deployed. The teenage Peterson boy, who had always seemed sullen and uninterested in community affairs, surprised everyone by approaching Sarah with an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Money for your HOA fees," he said quietly. "I've been working part-time at the grocery store. Mom and Dad don't know, but I heard what happened and it's not right." Sarah opened the envelope to find $300 in carefully saved $20 bills. Tears filled her eyes as she realized this teenager had given her his entire savings. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "You can and you will," Mrs. Peterson said, appearing behind her son with pride shining in her eyes. "We should have helped sooner." More envelopes appeared throughout the morning. The Patel family contributed $200. The newlyweds from the corner house added $150. The elderly Mr. Rodriguez, who lived alone and was on a fixed income, pressed a crumpled envelope containing $50 into Sarah's hands. "It's all I have right now," he said apologetically. "Mr. Rodriguez, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "What that woman did to you and your baby, it could have been any of us. We're supposed to be a community." By the end of the morning, Sarah had received over $1,500 from her neighbors. But more than the money, she had received something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that she wasn't alone. "There's just one problem," Mrs. Chen pointed out during the impromptu community meeting. "Karen stole all the HOA funds. Bank records show she's been embezzling for years. Even if Sarah pays her personal debt, the community account is empty." "Then we start over," declared Mr. Johnson. "We elect new leadership and build this community the right way. No more fear, no more harassment, no more treating neighbors like enemies." The crowd murmured agreement. Someone called for a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. Someone else suggested dissolving the current HOA entirely and forming a new, more reasonable one. "I nominate Mrs. Chen for president," called out the teenage Peterson boy. "Seconded," shouted multiple voices. Mrs. Chen looked surprised. "I don't know if I'm qualified." "You're the only one who stood up to Karen," Sarah said, bouncing Emma gently as the baby gurgled happily. "You're the only one who tried to protect us." That afternoon they held an emergency HOA meeting. Karen was still in jail awaiting trial, so her position was automatically vacant. The community unanimously voted to elect Mrs. Chen as the new president. "First order of business," Mrs. Chen announced, her voice carrying new authority: "no more harassment of families in need. Second order of business, we help each other instead of tearing each other down. Third order of business, we investigate every single one of Karen's financial transactions and get our money back." 3 months later, Sarah sat in a federal courthouse, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. David had managed to get emergency leave and was sitting beside her, his military uniform crisp and his jaw tight with anger at what had happened to his family. Karen Whitmore looked very different from the woman who had terrorized the neighborhood. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect hair. She sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. The prosecutor stood up to address the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a woman who believed her position of minor authority gave her the right to terrorize her neighbors and steal their children. The defendant didn't just take Mrs. Martinez's money, she took her baby." The evidence was overwhelming. The mall security footage showed Karen walking around shopping while Emma cried. Text messages on her phone revealed she had planned to keep Emma until Sarah learned her lesson. Most damning of all was a voice recording from her car's hands-free system where she told a friend, "Sometimes you have to make people suffer to teach them respect." Sarah testified about the worst day of her life, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. "I trusted my community to be safe for my family. I never imagined someone would take my baby and use her as leverage over unpaid bills." David testified about the panic he felt when Sarah called him overseas, crying so hard he could barely understand what had happened. "I'm fighting for my country's freedom," he said, "but I couldn't protect my own family from a neighborhood bully." Even Mrs. Chin testified, her elderly voice carrying surprising strength. "In my country we had a saying, power without kindness is cruelty. This woman had small power and no kindness." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman announced. Karen's face went white. Sarah felt David squeeze her hand as Emma gurgled happily, unaware that justice was finally being served. 6 months after the trial, Willowbrook Heights looked like a completely different community. The harsh rules were gone, replaced with common-sense guidelines focused on safety rather than harassment. Front yards now featured children's toys, garden gnomes and colorful flowers without fear of fines. Karen Whitmore was serving a 5-year federal sentence for kidnapping and fraud. The embezzled HOA funds were being slowly recovered through the sale of her assets, including that silver SUV and her designer wardrobe. Sarah had been promoted to full-time at the clinic, and with David back from deployment, their little family was stronger than ever. Emma was now walking, toddling around their front yard without fear that someone would complain about her toys. Mrs. Chin had transformed the HOA from a source of dread into something wonderful. Monthly community barbecues brought neighbors together. A babysitting co-op helped working parents. The community garden produced vegetables that were shared with families in need. Sarah, Mrs. Chin called out one Saturday morning as Sarah was gardening with Emma. "You have visitor." Sarah looked up to see a young woman with a baby stroller approaching nervously. "Hi," the woman said. "I'm Jessica Walsh. I just moved in down the street. I heard about what happened here and I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Sarah asked, confused. "For standing up to that horrible woman. I was in an abusive HOA situation in my last neighborhood, and when I heard your story on the news, it gave me the courage to report them too. My baby and I are safe now because you were brave enough to fight back." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. She had never thought of herself as brave, she was just a mother protecting her child. "We look out for each other here," Sarah said simply. "That's what communities should do." Emma toddled over to Jessica's baby, offering her a dandelion she had picked. The two babies giggled at each other while their mothers watched. 2 years later, Sarah received a letter that made her cry happy tears. It was from a mother in Texas whose HOA had tried to fine her for her son's autism-related behavioral issues. The mother had seen Sarah's story and used it to fight back, eventually getting the discriminatory rules overturned. The letter was one of dozens Sarah had received from families across the country who had been inspired by her fight. Karen's attempt to destroy one family had instead created a movement of people standing up to HOA bullying everywhere. Emma, now a precocious 3-year-old, loved hearing the story of the day mommy saved her from the mean lady. She didn't understand all the details, but she knew her mommy was brave and that their neighborhood was full of people who loved them. David had finished his deployment and was home for good. They had bought a house in the same neighborhood. Not because they had to, but because Willowbrook Heights had become a real community, the kind where children could grow up surrounded by love and support. On quiet evenings, Sarah would sit on her front porch watching Emma play in the yard that had once been a source of stress and harassment. Mrs. Chen would wave from her garden, Mr. Peterson would nod approvingly as he walked his dog, and the sound of children's laughter would fill the air. Sometimes Sarah would think about Karen locked away in prison, and feel a mixture of anger and pity. The woman had had a chance to build something beautiful with her authority, but instead had chosen fear and control. But more often, Sarah thought about the community that had risen from the ashes of Karen's tyranny. She thought about the neighbors who had rallied around her family, the strangers who had been inspired to fight their own battles, and the little girl who would grow up knowing that when people come together with love and determination, they can overcome anything. The pink tricycle still sat in the front yard, though Emma had long since outgrown it. Sarah kept it there as a reminder, not of the day her baby was taken, but of the day her community decided to choose love over fear. And every morning when Emma ran outside to play, her laughter echoing through the streets of Willowbrook Heights, Sarah knew that they had won something far more valuable than any court case. They had won their home back. They had won their community back. And they had proven that no amount of petty power could ever break the bond between a mother and her child, or destroy a community determined to stand together. The story of HOA Karen's fall from power became a cautionary tale told in neighborhoods across America. But for the people of Willowbrook Heights, it was simply the story of how they learned that true community isn't built on rules and fear. It's built on compassion, understanding, and the simple recognition that we all need each other. Emma would grow up in a world where her toys could stay in the front yard, where her mother's tears had watered the seeds of change, and where love had triumphed over power. And that was the most beautiful ending of all.